Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for logging in and enjoying this presentation for the next 45 minutes or so, give or take. We have our distinguished alum, Mr. Josh Rivera, who is going to share a little bit about his background and, of course, his journey, how he ended up where he's at, and then, of course, answer any questions you all might have. Please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. I will be monitoring that. And I will definitely make sure Mr. Rivera is aware of those questions. And if he can answer them, he most definitely will. So without further ado, Mr. Rivera, welcome. If you can just give us a little bit of background about who you are and just your journey, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So, I was having a little bit of a kind of like a pre-meeting conversation with Linda, but I'm originally from New York, grew up in the Bronx, born and raised up until about 2009, where my parents moved us down to the Carolinas, and I started going to UNC Charlotte the August of 2009. But before going to college, in high school, I would say I always kind of knew that I had an interest in engineering. I didn't know exactly like what discipline I wanted to focus into. But when I started freshman year and going through the College of Engineering, I think that really gave me the opportunity to kind of figure out what I thought would be like a good fit for me in terms of my skills, my competencies, that sort of thing. So I went ahead and pursued mechanical engineering. Never looked back on it. Loved it. It was very challenging. I had definitely had my trials and tribulations, but I came out in 2014 with my degree, and I think to present day, it's served me really well. So my background, I think for the last 10, 11 years that I've been out of school, is kind of crazy to think that I would say that I've developed myself within two realms of scope in terms of work. So half of my background I would say is in product development, and the other half is in application development. So I'll kind of go through a little bit of my work history um, to kind of follow you through that. So I graduated in 2014, and I started working for a company called Scott Safety. They're down in Monroe, North Carolina, right off of Airport Road. Actually, I still remember the street that they were located on. They were a company owned by Tyco International back in the day. They're owned now by 3M, which hopefully maybe you're familiar with the company. And Scott Safety manufactures air packs. The technical term for the device is a self-containing breathing apparatus, or an SCBA. And it's basically the firefighter gear that they wear to go into burning buildings. And what was really cool and unique about the role, so I joined the company as an entry level engineer, and I had the opportunity to basically touch every aspect of that type of product. So that was the product that I was assigned to. So I did everything from testing to working with quality, working directly with manufacturing. So Scott Safety as a company, they pride themselves on being made in USA. So everything is manufactured in site, it's tested, and the product has to live up to very strict standards because obviously it's what the industry defines as a life-saving device. So it's not just for the firefighter, but it's for the person that is in the burning building that needs to get pulled out and to save their life as well. So the products are held to very high quality standards, very high um, regulatory standards. And I think it was a really great intro into my career to understand what it means to be an engineer, what it means to work within an engineering capacity. And I really enjoyed it. You don't just learn about the aspects of engineering and what that entails, but you also learn how to function within an organization, within a company. I think a lot of times as wherever you are in your educational journey, whether you're a freshman or you're a senior, um, as you're looking for a new role, um, you see a lot of companies say that they want you to, function, across different departments, across different personnel, technical, non-technical. And I think this first job that I had out of school really gave me that kind of exposure, and It taught me how to work with others. It taught me how to um, gear myself in terms of, who am I speaking to from an audience standpoint? Am I talking about something technical to a non-technical person, or am I speaking engineer to engineer, or manufacturing engineer to manufacturing engineer, that sort of thing. So really good opportunity. I stayed with the company for almost 2 years, and then I moved into a different type of product development role, I would say, with a company called Rubbermaid. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. You probably have some of their products at home. They were located up in Huntersville, North Carolina, so literally on the opposite side of Charlotte. And I worked as a product development engineer with them for about 4 years. I would say a really fun company to work with. Them being a consumer type company under the holding company called Newell Brands. Um, it's all about fun. It's all about exciting the consumer. It's all about how the product looks, how it functions, does it work well with the user. And in that role, I was responsible for developing products from cradle to grave, which basically means you have an idea, you have a concept, and you bring that concept into production. And then once it's out in the market, you nurture it, you get feedback from the customers or the consumers, and then you either make improvements to it, or the product lives through a certain life cycle, 5, 10 years, whatever that time interval will be, and then it goes obsolescent, goes to the grave, and you repeat the process over. So for Rubbermaid, I worked on the food storage containers. I basically had my hand on all the different product lines that they've got, take-alongs, easy find lids, brilliance, that sort of stuff. Again, a lot of product that you probably see in like Walmart or Target or Bed Bath, depending where you shop. So did that for about 4 years, and then I knew that there was a part of me that wanted to kind of expand beyond product development and have a form of an interface with customers, and maybe not so much to be in an office setting, but to kind of be out in the world to, see different things. And so that led me into the direction of application development with a company called Sealed Air. They're in Charlotte. I think they're right near the Charlotte Douglas Airport. Can't remember the road or area, but they're pretty close to the airport. So Sealed Air, they manufacture protective packaging. One of their trademark products is bubble wrap, which we're all very familiar with. That's actually a trademarked product that they invented. And they also do different types of protective packaging for e-commerce. So if you've ever ordered something from Amazon that came in one of those brown bubble mailers, for example, that's their product. But then they also have a side of the business where they do protective packaging for food. So that's the side of the business that I worked on. And as an applications engineer, you are within scope to do product development. So in that regard, I worked on the film development side that protects the food during the manufacturing process, let's say. But then the application side is where you're going out on site visiting customers, and you're looking at without repeating the word, you're looking at their unique application, and you're figuring out what value can you bring to them. Are you there to solve a problem? Are you there to promote a new product? Are you there to maybe displace competition that's taken the place for that particular customer? And some of the different applications I've seen were quite interesting. I think the first customer I went and visited was a beef plant for a company called JBS. They're up there with like Tyson's, for example. They had a beef plant in Cactus, Texas, which is really remote. Um, but as you can imagine, they process beef, they process cows. And I'll let your imagination kind of take you to where what that looks like. Um, and it was very interesting, very eye-opening. Um, I think one of the interesting aspects of it is, you're kind of you're kind of looking at behind the scenes for something that we take for granted every day. We go to the supermarket, we buy ground beef, we buy steak, whatever comes off the cow. But being behind the scenes to kind of see how it's done, it's quite eye-opening, very interesting, very insightful. I've seen other applications within working for Sealed Air. I've been to poultry plants up in like Indiana. I went to a cheese factory in Schaumburg, Illinois, which was very interesting. I'd say cheese was probably the best out of all the other foods that I've seen. I've been to a soup kitchen in New Jersey, which was pretty interesting as well. Very good soup for what they do. But it was great. The type of equipment that Sealed Air provides to their customers are called vertical form fill machines. So if you can imagine this big standing piece of equipment, and the film comes in a roll, and what the machine does, it pulls that film through itself, and it forms a pouch. So if you've ever, if you look at a bag of potato chips, that bag is basically a flat piece of film that's been folded over, it's been sealed down the center, and it's been sealed on the top and the bottom. And obviously, somewhere in that process, the chips are dropped in there, and then the bag is sealed, or in many cases, the bag's filled with a gas to provide freshness for the chips until you open it. And that's basically the scope of the work that I did. So working on the film development, which um, what's really important about this film that packages the food is you have to look at shelf life. Some foods obviously can um, sit, sit out without being consumed. Some others can't. When you're dealing with shelf life, uh, you're also looking at the aesthetic of the food as well. So, classic example, you go to Walmart to go buy a pack of chicken. Chicken typically has that very bright kind of pinkish, orangish kind of tone to it. And that's a visual indicator for freshness. But if you look at a pouch of chicken that looks very pale, doesn't have those color cues, you're probably less likely to pick it up and buy it. So, um, film development helps to control that shelf life as well as what the overall aesthetic of the product will look like. And you have other things like worrying about microbial content. So obviously, all food, you know, raw in that state will perish. So it was my responsibility to make sure that you're balancing all these different elements that the film has to provide to the food in order to give the desired result to the end user. Um, so yeah, that was Sealed Air in a nutshell. And then I moved over into a role that was a little bit more industrious. I worked for a company called Megadyne. They are also located in Charlotte, right near the South Carolina border, basically, like right before you would turn to go into Carowinds, basically. And as an application engineer in that role, I worked at the manufacturing site, which they produce timing belts. So if you can imagine a standard belt that runs in your car to help it move, help drive like the air conditioning, your alternator, all that fun stuff underneath the hood. Those are the types of products that they manufacture. And what I thought was really interesting about that role is it opened doors to more industrious, or I would say heavy engineering type um, usage situations or applications. Um, so I've been into places like VW and Nashville, or not, was it Nashville? Chattanooga, excuse me. I've been in places like Volkswagen, Toyota, GM. I've been in places where they manufacture building materials for houses, for example. Um, and what was interesting about that role is I think it came down to the product, right? Timing belts have a very interesting science and engineering behind them. There's a lot of different things that you have to look at in terms of how that timing belt's going to mesh with the application. You're looking at a lot of solid mechanics and physics and machine design, which are courses that I do remember from my days back in school. So um, I would say just about every role that I've held, I've had to look back in my education for reference, which is really good because I think sometimes we sit in a classroom and learn a whole bunch of stuff, and we take tests and we pass them and we we carry that knowledge, and then we try to find an opportunity where that knowledge can turn into something usable for us. And so with the job with Megadyne, timing belts, um, they're susceptible to elongation. The material is a very hard plastic with a very high shore A hardness. Yeah, shore A hardness. Um, and as an engineer in that situation, you have to monitor the stresses on the belt, peak load, um, the belt's spinning at a certain speed, so you have to look at how RPM affects the mechanical performance of the belt. Um, Timing belts typically made up to a motor and a pulley, so what we'd say in a one-to-one setup. So depending on how large the pulley diameter is, can affect the amount of service life you can get out of the belt. Obviously, over time, the belt will crack. You've got micro cracks. How does that affect the overall performance of the belt? So you're looking at a whole bunch of different uh, technical and mechanical aspects um, for that type of product, let's say. Um, excuse me. And then after Megadyne, um, a little bit of personal backstory. At the time that I was working for Megadyne, I reconnected with a person from my past. She and I were longtime friends, and in our early childhood. And then right at about the point where I started college, we kind of lost touch with each other, and then we reconnected. I would say probably 3 4 years ago. Started seeing each other, um, and then we made the decision that we wanted to be together. And so after we got married, I made the decision to move to the UK, to write a new chapter of my life. Um, and that's how that's how I basically made it over here to the UK. Had to go through a visa process to basically have the right to live in another country. Um, and with that visa process, um, you get the right to work, you get the right to live here, and basically have access to what the country has to offer. So that was quite a long process, but I did um, I did pack up shop basically in Charlotte. Went back home, lived with my parents for a little while I went through this transition phase. And it was really nice to actually be back at home at my early 30s. Because I had always been away from my parents since I moved down from New York. I honestly started school and never looked back. So that was really nice. And then yeah, I know I'm throwing a lot, so I don't know. Do we want to have like a quick pause before I kind of continue into the UK side, or
No, I think you did great. I am curious, is your wife from the UK or is she an American?
no? She's British. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, I was just wondering about that. Okay, so she's
Yes.
already working in the UK or was in the UK and you guys reconnected.
Yeah. So we we met on vacation, or as the British call it, we met on holiday, um, in the Dominican Republic, so in the Caribbean. Um, I think I was like maybe 12 or 13. She was like 11 or 12. We were little kids, and we, our family, interacted with their family. We had a great time, and then I guess my parents kept in contact. They exchanged emails. I mean, back then you're talking, oh my gosh, like early 2000s. So we didn't have all the social media that we have right now. So they exchanged emails, and then when we went back to New York at the time, um, I remember, turning on MSN Messenger and finding my wife, finding her, and we started chatting. We spoke over webcam at the time, and it was kind of like a childhood romance, in all honesty. And we stayed in, we were like inseparable, except I was in America and she was in, the United Kingdom. And I think as we got towards like the later half of being a teenager, You kind of get wrapped up in life, and I think the distance made it really hard to kind of continue that momentum of being connected with each other. And we fell out of touch, and my life went this way and her life went that way. And it wasn't until about, like I said, about 3 or 4 years ago, I went on Instagram to see if I could find her, and I found her. And in all honesty, call it a love story, romantic story, but we literally picked up where we left off. Um, and so I made the first trip to the UK. So we met up in Edinburgh, Edinburgh, Scotland, um, to just kind of, see each other for the first time, and kind of, you know, had a lot of good talks and conversations, and we were trying to figure each other out, where we were in life. But Scotland was beautiful. We spent a week up there. If you know a little bit of the history of Scotland, as it pertains to the UK, they've got a lot of historic castles. There's a lot of history, and there's a lot of that old world kind of feel. Um, so it's a place that I would highly recommend anyone to go and visit. Um, but I went to Scotland, and then I think the next trip she met me in Charlotte, showed her around, introduced her to my family, and then we basically did, back and forth for a little while. And then, we had a conversation, and, decided, yeah, let's make this work. Let's make this happen. And yeah, I'd say the rest is history. Um, so once my visa cleared, I was able to get back to work. So I had a bit of a time, I would say, from May of 2023 till about February of 2024, um, that I couldn't work really, which was fine. I spent time at home with my parents, and then I moved just after Thanksgiving. So it was really good to reconnect with my parents, and spend time with them, and catch up on things. And then moved to the UK in November, and basically it was just a matter of waiting for my visa to be approved. Um, and we can kind of go through the different options if somebody wanted to ever consider, moving to the UK, and have a route to integrate into the society. But that is one of the options: is you marry somebody of a different country, and through marriage you obtain, I would say, temporary citizenship status, and that entitles you to work, that entitles you to live, rent, buy a car, etc. Um, but yeah, so in February, I started working for a company called Habisit. They are a global entity, and they were actually a competitor to Megadyne in the States. The reason why I pursue them is I really enjoyed working in the power transmission space with the timing belts. Um, and so I wanted to try to stay in that space because, like I said, I really enjoyed it. Um, and so with Habisit, it was really good, in all honesty. I didn't stay in the role for too long. I think after about 6 months, I was feeling a bit of burnout. I'll get into that in a second. But so the role required me to be a technical manager. So that entailed being a subject matter expert for the entire country, for the entire UK, on timing belts. But then I was also responsible for sales of that product line. So Habisit as a company, they have three primary product lines: timing belts, which I kind of briefly spoke about. They manufacture conveyor belts. So an easy example is if you go to checkout line at Target, and you're not doing self checkout, you're there in line. That conveyor belt that's moving your food or whatever you're buying to the person to scan it, they make those types of belting. The only difference for them is the UK is a very big food manufacturing um, um, industry. So I think there was a stat that I read into, that about 17% of the entire workforce in the UK is for the food manufacturing industry. And that's everything from bread, um, cookies, biscuits. I mean, anything that comes from wheat, basically, they manufacture over here, or potatoes. but about 17% of that workforce is just dedicated to the food industry. And that's everything from working on the production line to being one of the maintenance engineers to working in the distribution of the food, anything that cites the food industry that you're talking about that particular workforce. Um, so being in the role of a technical manager, um, uh, being responsible for, answering inquiries, responding to customers as they, have questions, but then also driving sales. So one of the really interesting, and I'd say advantageous, um, aspects of the role was the travel part. So the role was initially, well, not initially, but it was work from home. But then I was also required to go out and visit customers, whether they were existing or doing a lot of cold calling. So what was nice about that is it allowed me to basically travel the company and work at the same time. Travel the country and work for this, work at the same time. So can't tell you all the places that I've been in the UK, but it was really great to kind of see different parts of the country, and be out visiting different types of customers, seeing different types of food applications, which was really really cool. So for us, we have Lay's chips, for example, in the States. Over here, it's the same company, but they're called Walker or Walker Crisps, and they're actually owned by PepsiCo. So I've been in a few different, potato chip factories, and just seeing how the product is made from the actual potato or the spud that they call it to something you buy off the shelf. It's really fascinating. Um, but I've been in other food type, manufacturing sites. Biscuits, or what we would refer to as cookies in the States, are very popular over here. And it's a bit cultural, because you would have coffee or a cup of tea, and it's usually accompanied with a few biscuits or a few cookies, and that's kind of the way of life over here, which is really nice. Um, so I was in that role for about 6 months, and I left it because the the um, the way that the sales aspect of the role was structured, um, I didn't think I was getting a lot of support, and I found myself, um, not being able to leave my house basically because there was so much demand for technical support on the product from the wide array of customers that they had. I wasn't able to leave my house and make the sales calls, and I was in conflict with my manager because she wanted me to go out on the road, but then I also had to answer emails. I obviously can't do the both when I obviously can't do both while I'm driving. And sometimes I would have days where I would be on the road 5, 6 hours, um, which was quite exhausting. Um, so it was great to go to many different parts of the country, but at the same time, um, the work started to be less and less fulfilling because of the challenge to balance both parts of it. Um, and so from that, I worked with a company called Ritherden. They are a sheet metal manufacturer. They manufacture the electrical enclosures that you would see on the sides of the highway, or you would see at like an intersection. So all of the electronic components that controls the signaling for the lights, for example, the stoplights, for example, they make those types of housings. And they also make several different other types of sheet metal products that are meant for like supporting poles, or for housing developments. So if you've ever noticed, let's say in an apartment building, um, these large metal boxes that are just kind of sticking out the wall. Sometimes they're meant for like emergencies for like fire or water or something like that. They make those types of enclosures as well. So a lot of sheet metal, um, a lot of sheet metal CAD, which was really really good. Um, I do think the role was probably a little bit um, advertised differently than what the actual work entailed. Um, so I think after being in the role for a little while, um, I figured out that I didn't think that the work was for me. But I do think during my time I was able to contribute quite a bit of value to the company. When they interviewed me, they were very excited that I had all that product development experience from working with Rubbermaid, and so I think that's what got my foot into the door. So kind of looking back, um, I think it was very beneficial for my career to kind of diversify in different companies and in different scopes of work. And so now I'm in a new role as a senior applications engineer with a company called Hiva, and they manufacture um, the heavy hardware that goes onto trucks to lift dumpsters, basically. So, the big, massive metal dumpsters that sit behind, department stores or what have you. There's a truck that has to go and pick that up and take it off to the landfill and then bring it back. So that mechanical mechanism or mechanical system that lifts that heavy dumpster onto the truck, that's what this company designs. Um, Over here, it's called something a little bit different, but I wanted to try to keep it consistent to what we're familiar with in the States, not to confuse anybody. But yeah, I've just started the role, so I'm still fairly new and fresh to it. So I don't have too much to share other than there's a lot of relying on understanding um, stresses and strains in metal, lifting, and just those sorts of things. So, but yeah, I'd say that's kind of in a nutshell, a little bit about my life, my career, how I got to where I am today. So I'd be happy to take a quick pause for questions or
Awesome.
um, yeah, go into anything that's of
Sure.
interest.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Josh. That was just amazing. And so let's go back real quickly and talk about the whole visa process and kind of what's that all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to my knowledge, there's one of four ways that you could come to the UK on a visa. Um, Even before that, actually, um, as a US passport holder, you can come to the UK and you can tour the country, you can visit, you can stay up to 6 months without a visa, and that's just the power of our passport. Um, there is a form that you have to fill out. It's basically like an entry notification form just to let the UK government know that you're entering the country. I think it's like $10 or something. You might have seen it in the news, especially with people who want to travel to Europe from the US. They're introducing these kind of safeguards where they just want to know who you are, maybe to do a quick background check, and then once you filled it out, it's good for X amount of years. But for the UK, excuse me, to visit, you can do it 6 months, visa free, and then I think once you leave, there's a 90-day cool down period, and then you can re-enter the UK as a visitor for the same 6 months, and you can repeat the cycle. But if you wanted to come into the UK to live on a temporary or permanent basis, there's one of four ways. The first way could be through an employer. So if you work for a global company that has an international presence in the UK, they could potentially transfer you. Obviously, the burden would be on the company to sponsor you on that visa, um, and so all the paperwork and logistics would be on their behalf. The second route, which is probably like the easiest, I would say, and the most common, is you can enter the country on a student visa. And so I actually worked with a girl at my company at one of my previous companies with Rubbermaid, and she went to Scotland on a student visa. She actually signed up for an MBA program at a university that she wanted to go to. And she told me that it was as easy as getting into the MBA program. You file the visa, the UK government almost instantly approves it, and then you've got right to entry. And as a student, you have some ability to work. Obviously, they want you focusing more on, your education. I think she told me she had like a little part-time job at Starbucks, just to make a little bit of money. But your primary focus is to, go through the program and graduate. The only catch is obviously as you're leaving the program, you're on a time window to have sponsorship from a company that wants you, for their talent pool, basically. So for her, she was very fortunate, and she was able to get sponsored from a company. I don't remember the ins and outs of the company, but yeah, she was able to get sponsored. And I think you have to be under that sponsorship for, I think it's either 3 or 5 years, at which point you can then apply for citizenship. And then she's no longer at risk of being deported, because effectively, if the company decide to let you go for whatever reason, unless you could turn around quick enough to um, obtain a new sponsorship, then unfortunately you're deported out of the country. Um, the third route, which is the route I went, was you marry a British citizen. Um, and over here, once you've proved the marriage, because obviously, there can be bad apples that would abuse the ability to supposedly marry somebody just to obtain, the right to work, the right to live in the country. So once you prove your marriage, the UK government will give you what's called a spouse visa or a family visa, and that entitles me to all the same rights as a British citizen, minus anything regarding welfare or benefits, as they call it over here. And with my visa, I'm not sure why it's structured this way, but it is what it is. My visa is good for 2.5 years, and then you apply for an extension, which gives you another 2.5 years. And then once you've done a total of 5 years in the UK, you can apply for what's called indefinite leave to remain, which is basically their way of saying you can stay in the country indefinitely, which also then entitles you to a British passport, and that effectively locks in your citizenship. And the great thing about us, being Americans, we can hold dual citizenship with the UK, so there's no issues with that. Um, and then I think the last option available is if you, as an American, applied for a role with a company in the UK and they wanted to give you sponsorship. I did try to go down that route first, after the fact that, me and my wife knew that we wanted to get married. I thought it would be easier on us in terms of the visa process, because proving your marriage, and also, you come into the country as a fiance first. You don't come in as as man and woman, or, married as man and woman. You come into the country as a fiance. You then have to go back and apply for the spouse visa. So it's kind of a two-step process, versus if a company in the UK wanted to sponsor you, you would come into the country as a skilled worker. And that gives you all the entitled rights to work and live and, open up credit, that sort of thing. So, but that is one of the more challenging routes to go down. I tried doing that for about 4 or 5 months of reaching out to companies, putting myself out there, and I was able to get an interview with one company. But then after they reviewed the laws and regulations around sponsoring foreigners effectively, one of the challenges that they came up against was they had to prove that the talent pool in the UK had been exhausted, and that I was the only person that could do the role. And so obviously that's a huge paper exercise for them. And, they decided to rescind the potential offer they were going to give me, which is fine. But yeah, those are the four ways, to summarize. Transfer from a company in the US, student visa, marriage visa or spouse visa, or a skilled worker visa from a sponsorship from the UK to someone in America. So yeah.
No, that's great. Yes, sounds like it's exactly like that in the US too, from what I know. You're right.
Yeah.
Someone who comes over here from another country has to really follow those four processes or has four choices. So I'm just curious, Josh, tell us a little bit about, if you can, people's perceptions of Americans. Have you run into anything? And it might have to be with the what they've seen on TV or what they hear politically, but I'm just curious. And like any country, people probably have their stereotypes, us of them and them of us. Can I just share with us a little bit of what your life is like over there? Are there
Yeah.
other Americans you hang out with, or share with us
Um,
what you're doing when you're not working?
yeah. So, um, it's very interesting. I would say my overall experience has been quite positive and friendly. Um, almost in most encounters when I meet someone for the first time that's British and I start talking, it's like their ears perk up and they're like, "Oh, where are you from? Like you're not from around here, are you?" Um, and I go into a little bit of my backstory, and it usually turns into one or three responses that I get back. It's well, what are you doing over here? Or how do you like the UK? Or something else. I can't really remember, but those are kind of like the two responses that I typically get back. And I think for the most part, I think the British like Americans. I would say the only bias I haven't personally experienced, but from my wife who's lived in this part of the country, is it seems like the northeast and the northwest. So back up just 2 seconds. So the country's kind of broken up into like three main sections, I would say. You have the north, which is comprised of the northwest and the northeast. I live in the northwest side of the country. You have the Midlands, which is literally just a big chunk of the country, which is the middle. It's just called the Midlands. Um, Actually, a better way to define it would be like the regions. And then you have the South, which is like the Southwest, the Southeast, and then you have London. So it's kind of interesting, but London is kind of its own region in itself. And from what my wife's told me, a lot of Northerners are quite friendly, very hospitable. They'll come up to you and strike up a conversation. And it kind of reminds me of home in a sense. Like, I know I was born and raised in the North, but I think being down in the South for over 10 years, I like to think that us Southerners could be a little bit more friendly, more hospitable, more warm and welcoming. And maybe people from up north, no offense to anybody on the call, could be a little bit more, just kind of, I'm just here to do what I need to do and I keep it moving, high and by kind of situation. So, and from what my wife's explained to me, it's like the opposite, no, the British from the north seem to be very friendly and warm and welcoming, and the British from the south are a little bit on the colder side, kind of just hustle and bustle. But yeah, I think all my encounters and experiences have been really positive and good. I can't tell you how many times I've kind of shared a little snippet of my life story with somebody um who's just asked, where I'm from and what am I doing over here and what's my perception of the UK. Um, so yeah, what else? It's quite interesting you mentioned in terms of like the views from being on the other side of the pond. Um, Obviously, especially with like TikTok, for example, with it knowing that I'm on a different side of the world, the news that I receive is a little bit different. I'm still in tune with the news that's going on in the States, but kind of looking back, I think we are quite isolated from the rest of the world. Um, it almost sometimes feels like you know I'm looking inside the glass box, and the glass box being the U.S., the States. Um, it does seem like we're kind of in our own insulated part of the world, and I think that could just be due to geography. I mean, obviously we've got Canada and Mexico and the rest of Central and South America, but the rest of the world is over here basically. And with being so close to Europe, if you're not familiar, the UK is its own entity since Brexit. So they're not a part of the EU anymore. Um, but it's interesting to kind of see what else is going on in the rest of the world, but then also looking back at home and kind of seeing what's going on over there as well. Um, without getting too political, trying to keep it as very neutral as possible. I think the British had a less than favorable um, view and opinion of the previous administration. And with the new administration that we have now, they seem to be a bit more favorable. So take that with you as you may. So that kind of covers the political, but um, I'd say the way of life over here is not it's not too different from living in the States, I would say. I'd say it's about maybe 90% the same. The 10%, at least from what I can observe, for example, like let's say living in North Carolina, you need a car to pretty much go everywhere. Unless you live like in Charlotte, for example, where you can hop on the light rail or catch a bus. Um, you're pretty much stuck to needing to own a car to go about. And I would say that's probably for most of the U.S. unless you live in big cities like New York, Boston, Atlanta, Columbia. But over here in the UK, public transportation is it's quite the way to go. In all honesty, I own a car because I have to commute about 20 minutes to work. But where I live, where I'm located, there's a train station that's about 10 minutes from my house, and I could literally go to Scotland. I can go down to London. I live between two big cities, Liverpool to the west and Manchester to the east, and I can get to either one of those in about 20 minutes. So for comparison, and I was thinking about this prior to this call, it would be like living in Greensboro and being able to hop on a train and be in Charlotte in like 20 minutes and being in Raleigh in like 40 minutes. Like obviously we've got Amtrak, but it's a lot quicker. And when you think about it, the UK is effectively an island. It's a lot smaller than the States. So, things are a lot closer. But I think the UK really pride themselves on, being very about being very friendly in terms of public transportation, that you can take a bus to go anywhere, you can take a train to go anywhere. And it's quite nice. Um, what else?
What about the cost
Um,
of living, Josh? How's the cost of living over there? And did the salaries match your cost of living? And
oh, so
that is
the
a
the
question from a student.
yeah, the cost of living is quite different. Um, it there's quite a disparity in the sense of, you know, what's a good example? So like over here you pay something called a council tax, and you pay it monthly for either renting or if you're on a mortgage. The equivalents to the States would be like paying your property taxes on your home. But property taxes in the States, at least to my knowledge, in North Carolina, you pay it on a yearly basis, versus over here, you pay a council tax on a monthly basis. And that tax that you pay, it covers, the local municipalities, it covers the local services like, trash pickup, if you've got a park, they maintain the grounds, that sort of thing. And what's really interesting is the further away from town that you live, the more expensive it gets versus the closer into town that you live, the cheaper it gets, which I think in some cases in the States, if you live a lot closer to a city where your property value is a lot higher because of that proximity to the city, you'd pay higher taxes versus, let's say in Charlotte, for example. I lived in Huntersville, so I can remember what I was paying in property tax. But let's say living in Denver or living, somewhere near Lake Norman, it varies. So, um, but in terms of cost of living, I would say it's less. And that's taken into account the exchange rate, between the dollar and the British pound. Like for example, I could go to my local grocery store and buy a loaf of bread for about $1, and that's like wheat bread, versus in the States, a loaf of wheat bread will cost you what, $3, $4 maybe. Um, so I think what makes the food here relatively inexpensive is because it makes such a big part of the industry over here. I think a lot of the UK is rooted around farming and it's rooted around agriculture, so because there's so much supply of it, it keeps your food costs really low. Um, other things like electricity, we pay for natural gas. If I'm thinking to what I paid in my house for my house in Huntersville, I would say it's probably a little less expensive. Um, and I think that could potentially be because, for example, in the UK, they do have, like traditional power plants that probably burn oil or burn, natural gas, but they also use a lot of wind power over here as well, and a lot of solar. Solar, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around because most of the time it's pretty cloudy over here, and it's pretty, there's a lot of overcast, so don't know what that's about. But in the UK, it is quite windy. Um, to the point where you get weather advisories on how windy it gets over here. So I think the UK benefits significantly from having wind turbines up, and they're all over the place. There's several different highways that I travel on that you see them all the time. Um, so I think on the food side, and like, let's say, living utilities, rent varies, right? We live, the town that we are closest to, called Warrington. We're about 10, 15 minutes out by car. So we pay a pretty modest rent, but obviously if you live close to the city, it would go up quite a bit. Um, Gasoline over here is quite expensive. I think the dollar equivalent is like about $6 a gallon. So gas is quite expensive. I think part of that has to do with policy, government policy, because the UK want to try to promote a cleaner and greener environment. They've got a big push. At one point in time, they had a big push for diesel, but then they've kind of changed their mind on it, and they are pushing more electric, especially I think electric vehicle mandates. But gas is quite expensive. I would say, your common necessities, clothing, um, personal care, furniture, stuff that you'd buy, for the most part, I think it probably falls in line with what you'd spend in the States, right? I don't know, if you buy a nice shirt from Target versus, a nice shirt from Belk or Nordstrom, you're gonna pay the higher price for the product that you're buying, and I think that's very similar over here. So, um, yeah, I think that answers
Gosh,
your question.
no, that's absolutely awesome and very helpful for students, right? Because every part of the world has different expenses associated with it. I'm curious, is
Yeah.
is your work week 35 or 40 hours?
Um,
Or does it vary? And does your company value work-life balance?
I think the British sentiment on work-life balance is quite big over here. In the three different companies that I worked for, um, typical start time was around 8:30, sometimes as late as 9 o'clock. And I say late because I think to most Americans that's pretty late to start your workday. And you'd finish the day around 3:30, 4:30. The exact number of hours, I think, for my job right now, I think it's somewhere in between 37 and 38 hours. So my work day starts at 8:30 and it ends at 5. But one of the nice perks that they offer is kind of like a staggered start and a staggered finish, and they do it in like 15-minute intervals. So if I get to work at 8:15, I can leave at 4:45, and they'll let you do that down to, I think, about 7:30. So if you get in at 7:30, you're finishing at what, 3:30? So it's pretty nice. Um, in the case of the factory workers, so where I work, my place of business, we've got office space and we've got manufacturing on site. They will do longer hours Monday through Thursday, but then they get like a half day on Friday, and that's just standard. So I do think the British value that kind of work-life balance. Um, you do have, in terms of family situations, where parents have to pick up their children from school. So that's one big thing here is, um, there are no school buses. So parents have to bring their children to school and pick them up from school. Obviously, there's after school programs for, parents that can't make that work. Um, but companies are very understanding, to, let's say, a mom or a dad who, starts work at 9 o'clock, but then has to finish the day at, 2:30 or 2:45 because, school pickup is at 3:15, let's say. So yeah, so I think the work-life balance here is a lot better in my opinion from what I've experienced in the States.
That's awesome. I know we're wrapping up here. I do want to go back real quickly. You interviewed with the UK-based company. Can I ask what maybe in your background was of interest to them that maybe our students here could be doing, right? Like, was there something, was it just your experience or your just willingness to go over there? Is there anything our students here could do to maybe make themselves more attractive to a UK-based company or perhaps even a US employer who has facilities over there?
Yeah, I think there's a few folds to that question. Um, I I came to this country with a unique story, because I think of the three different companies that I worked at, you know, almost uh one of the most commonly asked questions I was given was, well, how'd you get over here? Like, why are you over here? So I think the employers definitely liked a good backstory. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for everybody. But I think what really attracted these companies, what made me stand out to these companies, I think, was how diversified my work experience is, which I think you kind of have to figure out your sweet spot as you're kind of going out into the workplace, because I think there are two sides to that where you could stay with a company and you can kind of grow and you could make it your home and you can spend 5, 10, 15 years. I think early on for me, I don't think that was for me per se. I wanted to kind of make myself the jack of all trades and kind of learn different bits. And I think that diversification in my work experience is what really helped me stand out. Considering, me as a foreigner coming into a new job market, and being able to effectively, beat out other candidates that, are probably from the UK. I think it speaks volume. So, depending on what you decide to do as a young professional, whether you want to stay with one company and you want to learn and grow with them, or if you want to kind of diversify yourself, I would definitely say put your time in first, because that company is making an investment in you. So I think it's respectful for you as the individual to give them a return on that investment. Um, but then, as well as figure out what you want to focus on. Um, for me, it was, developing products, and I'm taking it into regard of being a mechanical engineer by degree, um, focusing on product development, but then also having that kind of customer side to it as well. And my outlet for that was application development. Um, so yeah, I think a little bit of my backstory, the diversification of my work experience, um, and I think a bit of it just kind of goes off your charisma as a person, how you present yourself, how you conduct yourself, how socially calibrated. Because especially for me at this stage of my career, being in the workforce for 11, 12 years, these companies were looking for somebody that was very polished, knows their stuff, can conduct themselves, present, interface with other people, and being able to drive on the company goals and company aspirations. So yeah.
No, I think that's wonderful. I think one of the pitfalls that maybe some people do is go in with an attitude that Americans are superior, for example.
No,
And so you got
no.
to be real careful no matter what country you go to, is that to be open-minded, I would imagine, right? And
Yes.
realize you're in their country.
Yes, and I think to a degree, you have to be willing to assimilate, to the country that you're in, or the culture of that company that you want to be a part of. A good example when I was working for Megadyne. So they are headquartered in Turin, Italy, which is the northwest part of the country, so nearing France. And for the Italians, um, espresso is a way of life for them. And so I remember I was there for a week for training, and very, very regiment or very biblically, you had an espresso break at 10 o'clock, and you had an espresso break at 3 o'clock, and very much to like the cliche, you go around the water cooler and talk to each other and catch up on each other's days. They had a station in the office where there was espresso being served, and you stopped your work, like little of you being in a meeting, and you went and got a cup of espresso, and you conversated with your coworkers. And over here, um, it's kind of similar, where you'll kind of put breaks in your day to make yourself a cup of tea, or make yourself a coffee. But one of the cool things that I've kind of observed here, and maybe it could just be this company because I hadn't seen it in the other companies, is sometimes your coworkers will come by and they'll just do a run for everybody, where they'll go and make 4 or 5 different cups of coffee or cups of tea, and just kind of hand it out just to kind of be sociable and be friendly towards each other. So
No,
yeah.
that's awesome. That is great advice. I'm so sorry we're out of time. We got to let you get back to your life because it is evening over there. I don't know if everybody realizes, but the UK is several hours. And so Josh is getting
Yes.
into his evening here, and I'm sure he's got other things to do. But thank you so very much, Josh, for your time. I cannot thank you enough. You just did a phenomenal job, and we're recording this, so we'll share it with the students who are not unfortunately able to join us. But gosh, I just cannot thank you enough.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate the opportunity to present. Thank you very much.